Good afternoon and welcome to the Arrowhead webinar series. Today's presentation is entitled Upgrades, Material Fees, Non-Covered Services, and the HITECH Act. We are delighted to welcome back Mr. Ben Tuanei, who will be sharing his considerable expertise on this topic. We deeply appreciate his willingness to join us today and to share his insights with all those attending. Additionally, we are joined by Hernan Varas, the instructor for the Total Team Training course offered by the Dr. Dick Barnes Group. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We hope you find the information presented today both useful and insightful. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, all attendee lines are muted during the presentation. We will have a Q&A session during the last 10 minutes of the webinar. You can submit your questions at any time by typing them into the chat or question windows visible on your screen. Secondly, at the end of the webinar, a short survey will appear as you exit. Please take a moment to complete it, as your feedback is invaluable for planning future webinars. If you are a member of the AGD, you can provide us with your AGD number on the last question, and we will go ahead and submit the CE for you on your behalf. And lastly, we will be posting a recording of this webinar online early next week. Be sure to like us on Facebook or Instagram to be notified when that link is available.
Excellent. Thank you, sir, for that wonderful, wonderful opening there and introduction. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Ben Tuanei, and we're going to have a really fun next 30 to 60-minute discussion on how to implement this whole world of upgrades, material fees, added value fees, and how they tie into a federal law called the HITECH Act. I want to first start just to sort of get us to think about the concept of knowledge when it comes to dentistry and insurance. Oftentimes you see a major disconnect between how insurance companies define things versus how you define things in a dental practice. So I'm going to start with this story here just to sort of give us some perspective on this whole concept behind this idea of truth. So an atheist was seated next to a little girl on an airplane and turned to her and said, "Do you want to talk? Flights go by quicker if you strike up a conversation with your fellow passengers." The little girl, who had just started to read her book, replied to the total stranger, "Well, what would you like to talk about?" "Oh, I don't know," said the atheist. "How about why there is no God or no heaven or hell or no life after death?" as he smiled smugly. "Okay," she said. "Those could be interesting topics, but let me ask you a question first. A horse, a cow, and a deer all eat the same stuff, grass. Yet a deer excretes little pellets, while a cow turns out a flat patty, but a horse produces clumps. Why do you suppose that is?" The atheist, surprised by the little girl's intelligence, thinks about it for a second and then responds with, "Well, actually, I have no idea." To which the little girl replies, "Do you really feel qualified to discuss God, heaven and hell, or life after death when you don't know poop?" She said the S word in that one, kind of makes it a little bit more laughable with that word. But the idea is there's a lot of misinformation. I heard this one quote the other day about the truth, the truth of things, concepts, especially as it pertains to what we know about insurance and dentistry, is that a lot of times misinformation, lies, and partial truths make rounds and rounds around this earth before the truth even has a chance to put its pants on in the morning. And I bring this up mainly because this concept is still extremely controversial in the industry. Fortunately, you have really good authors in dentistry who have published their opinions on this particular topic. One is Dr. Travis Campbell, who wrote a book on understanding dental insurance. Fantastic book as it pertains to our understanding of insurance as we currently know it. And he does talk about HITECH and material fees, and it's a good book to reference. There are other really great speakers and authors, lecturers in dentistry, but there is still controversy on this concept, mainly because the insurance industry continues to push back, and they're pushing back really hard. This presentation has been fully vetted by our attorneys. I am not an attorney, and I'm going to be speaking about laws, not as a representation or selling education as it pertains to legal components, because I'm not licensed to do that. So that's my disclaimer there, in the sense that what you're going to hear has been vetted by our attorneys, and I highly recommend finding a good healthcare attorney that understands HITECH and understands dental insurance laws. If you kind of feel that you want to explore this area, but you have legal concerns, that's my advice, is to vet this out thoroughly so that you're not one of the current examples of doctors who are being sued by insurance carriers for implementing a concept like this. What I want to do next is talk about a personal story, how I used this whole world of HITECH. And I'm going to explain HITECH further. Quick synopsis: HITECH is a federal law that protects insurance waivers, meaning that if I, as a patient, sign a HITECH insurance waiver, that gives me, as a patient, the constitutional right to get any treatment whatsoever without the use of my insurance. And there are situations where that's very helpful. And I'm going to share with you my personal story on how I discovered the use of HITECH within my own family dynamics. Fair warning, if any of you attended the webinar, when was this original webinar? It was like 6-7 years ago, 2018? Okay. So 2018, if you attended that webinar, a lot of this is repeat, but this is more intended to be an update on where we're at in an industry and how to implement these concepts safely. But this story I shared in 2018, so if you've heard it, you're going to hear it again. And you will see pictures of a premature child at 24 weeks to be exact, and that's my trigger warning for those of you that might have had experiences with premature children where this topic brings up emotions, raw emotions. So just brace yourself. I promise you, stick with me through this, because this is sort of my world in terms of the concept of the HITECH Act and how to implement the HITECH Act fully in your practice. So here's my son, Welton. So Welton was delivered at 24 weeks gestation. Backstory is that at 19 weeks gestation, my wife started to show signs of kidney failure. My background is I was a college athlete. I played football for the University of Arizona. My wife played softball at the college level as well. And sometimes, we all know this, that the human body doesn't react the same way it does for every person, every patient that you have that comes in through your doors. Everybody's different. And so in this case, in our late 30s, we decided to start having kids. And at 19 weeks gestation, she started to show signs of kidney failure. The treatment plan from the doctors at the time was to put her at bed rest at home, or at least give us instructions on how to do the appropriate amount of bed rest at home to lower her stress level, to lower her blood pressure and all that. The goal was to have her just hold on. You gotta keep that baby in for as long as you can. So 2 weeks went and came, and my wife comes back home after seeing the perinatologist to review the lab results. And at this point, she's now in liver failure, and the kidneys are aggressively starting to shut down. So the perinatologist ordered her to be immediately admitted into the nearest hospital that was equipped to deliver premature children under 30 weeks. So by the time I got home, we did that. We took her to that hospital, and this was a more serious issue. Naturally, now you're looking at multiple organ failure here. And when we arrived at the hospital, the specific set of instructions from the OBs, the perinatologists that were there, as well as we had an anesthesiologist meet us as well to kind of assure us that they're there to help us, and that we're in really, really good hands, right? And so they mentioned that this is such a critical stage of the pregnancy to where she has to hold him in there for at least another 2 weeks minimum. And the reason why is, this is week 22 of the gestational period. In this particular hospital setting, the survival rate was 0% for a 22-weeker at the time. 23-weekers, it was a couple of percentage points, maybe 1 or 2% or less. 24-weekers, on the other hand, had above an 80% chance of survival. And then the further you get along in the gestational period, the greater the chances are of survival for a premature child. 24 weeks sort of being the minimum threshold at that time. And so we did it. We were in the hospital. We took it very seriously, and we made it to 24 weeks and 2 days. At that point, it was in the evening time. Of course, this is in November, so dark, and in come the OBs getting ready to scrub in. They just came to say, hey, we got your labs back. Now you're in heart failure and we cannot wait any longer, because at this stage, if your heart fails, that's the end of your journey. We don't want that to happen. We're not going to let it happen. We're going to do everything in our power to help you. So they said, we recommend a C-section immediately, and that's what we're here for, is to sort of give you the informed consent discussion about the next phase of her treatment. Within a few minutes after that, she's wheeled into the OR and they perform the C-section. And this is my son Welton with a lot more light. That's my left hand draped over his body, 1 pound, 10 ounces, 13 inches in height. Needless to say, just a struggling little 24-weeker. After snapping this photo and answering all the health history questions with now the new specialist, the neonatologist, I go back to the OR and they're closing up my wife and then, of course, getting her ready to wheel back to her recovery room so that she can spend the next couple of days recovering. We wheeled her back to the recovery room after the surgery, and I just sit there sort of pondering, for me being a first-time father, a husband of a couple of years now, just trying to figure out as a non-clinician, how do I contribute towards their care? In the midst of this pondering episode, closer now to midnight, I hear this faint knock on the door, and in comes a gentleman, which my first impression, he was dressed like a priest or a clergy member, right? Just in a suit and a tie. He comes in with a stack of documents, introduces himself and said, Mr. Tuine, congratulations on being a first-time father. My name is so-and-so, and I'm here to assure you that you're in good hands. So he kind of gives that positive reinforcement, which I think is good. It kind of helped me out quite a bit. But then he said, and I am the billing manager of this hospital. I'm here to give you enough information for you to consent to the next phase of your son's treatment. So that discussion sounds familiar, right? By law, before treatment is performed, we have to give patients informed consent on the clinical components as well as the financial components of treatment. And that's what he was there for. It's kind of odd to me because leading up to this point, I'd never talked to anybody about money or about insurance or about anything financially related to my son or wife's care. So this was a bit of a shock. I pull him out to the hallway, mainly because the anesthesiologist was very strict about the fact that nobody comes in this room unless they're here for clinical work, drawing blood, checking vitals, or whatever. No conversations. He was very strict. So she's got to rest, and you can't have any noise in here other than the machines that are already there beeping. And so I pull him out in the hallway for that reason, but also because I kind of felt like, well, this discussions about money when I'm not really prepared. I'm very tired. It's almost midnight. There are cameras in the hallways. Most CCTV, closed circuit television, like at any building that you go to, a lot of them have very poor video, and no audio mostly. Well, in most hospital settings, they have audio for liability purposes. And I knew that. I was like, okay, I don't have a representative here with me now. So we're just going to use these cameras to make sure that somebody is listening, right? And we have a record of that. So I began to ask, how can I help you? He said, well, Ben, your son is in a situation where he's required to have open heart surgery in order for him to live. And this open heart surgery is so emergent that if not performed within the next 40 to 60 minutes, he'll die. He didn't use that word. He said he just won't make it. So on behalf of the hospital, I'm here to seek consent from you to allow us to engage in this life-saving treatment and use the hospital resources to achieve that goal. And then he handed me 603 pages of legal documents. My first action was when I received the documents, I flipped them over, I looked at the last page, the signature page, and it was 603 pages. I get to feel that I was equipped with enough information to make a decision at that moment, but I also recognize that this is urgent. Like we can't waste seconds. But I had to. I guess they weren't wasted seconds. I responded by saying, well, look, you've given me less than 30 seconds of a verbal informed consent discussion, but there are 603 pages, and I can, in looking at the legal style of writing, I won't understand any of this in 60 minutes, or even probably not even in 6 hours. So you got to give me more information about what I'm really facing so I can make an informed decision. We danced around this whole concept of informed consent for what felt like an eternity. To be exact, it was around 4 minutes and 40 seconds. And finally, at that point, He put his foot down as a billing manager and said, Ben, we're wasting time. Every minute, every second that goes by, your son is getting closer and closer and closer to the end. So if you don't sign it quickly enough and he dies, that's on you. And I don't want that to happen for you. So finally, I kind of gave in because I didn't know what questions to ask. I signed the document, I dated it, and I handed it to him. And I said, I just want you to know that I've yet to be informed about what I need to know. Like 30 seconds of verbal disclosures compared to 603 pages of legal documents, I know I'm not being told something that's important. So by signing this document, I'm acknowledging that there are words, and there's a date that I'm acknowledging that I acknowledge that there are words on this date. I'm not acknowledging that I understand what's in this document. So if my son dies, I hope you understand that you're still on the hook to answer questions, and hopefully it doesn't go to court. And I think that sort of caught his attention, that he now realized that he wasn't talking to a dummy. He wasn't talking to somebody that takes these types of decisions lightly. Finally, he said, well, real quick, what I know is that there's a provision in your health plan where the doctors that normally perform this surgery, cardiothoracic surgeons, are not participating with your health plan, and there are no out-of-network benefits. So therefore, we are bringing in the next level of doctors that are participating with your health plan. In this case, they're general surgeons, and this is not an argument against the doctors, by the way. I just want to make that clear. So he said general surgeons, and at that point, I knew what question to ask next. I said, well, let's get to the brass tacks here. Let's talk about the most important thing, the outcome. For this particular surgery in this hospital, what is the success rate if a cardiothoracic surgeon performed the procedure compared to a general surgeon? Fair question, right? So we started with cardiothoracic surgeons, and the success rate was 98% or above. That's fantastic for an open heart surgery, at least from a guy that's non-clinical. To me, that was fantastic. I said, well, yeah, now I'm getting excited about saying yes to this. But then he said, well, those are the doctors that are out of network, but the doctors that we are using, and he hesitated on this, and he said the success rate for the same surgery in the same hospital is 15% or less, depending on the doctor. And I had to clarify that. I said, did you say 50 or 15? And he said 15, 5 less than 20, 5 more than 10. And at that point, I can't describe the emotional turmoil that I felt. But this is the reason why we ask questions, especially when we don't feel fully informed. We have a duty to ask questions. At least that's how I live my life. So he shared this, and I was blown away at the simple fact that insurance had so much influence over how clinical treatment is delivered to patients or offered to patients. And I didn't find that acceptable. So I turned to him and I asked, you're familiar with the HITECH Act that passed in 2009, yes? And he said, yes, sir. We got trained on that about 8 months ago. I'm very familiar with what it stands for and what it can be used for. And I said, great. Can you hand me page 603? I voided out my signature. I voided out the date. I said, please refer to the other half, the other side. I put HITECH insurance waiver on the top. I hereby elect to waive the use of my insurance, and I wish to have the cardiothoracic surgeons with that 98% average perform treatment on my son this evening. I'll put up any collateral that is necessary in an effort for us to retain the best possible treatment that's available. I signed it. I handed it to him and said, will you accept this? And he said, I think we will. I said, well, if you're worried about the money, you didn't even ask me if I could pay for this procedure. I don't care what it costs, but here's my wallet. You can take everything that I have. My mission and my objective as a first-time father is to protect him. So I'm going to make the most informed decision, or the decision that influences the best possible outcome. End of story. And that's how I approached his treatment. So this was my first time ever having any kind of encounter, having a real live example of how the HITECH Act is implemented, just with this one experience. Now, this is, of course, my son survived that whole ordeal. I mean, the kid has beautiful teeth, beautiful everything. He's 13 years old now. This is him as the Incredible Hulk at age, I think, 1.5 or 2. I mentioned that I've never been a clinician, but this is my first ever extraction. Most of you might not be impressed, but I was when I did it. I took that sucker off with a race car. And they say that children emulate their parents. I think he gets this probably from my wife, not from me. Not just kidding. This is something that men do everywhere, right? You know, when it comes to this whole idea of quality, in my opinion, we cannot have any outside parties influence the type of quality dentistry that anybody does. And it's so sad for me in this day and age to witness a race to the bottom in terms of quality care. And I don't say this to offend anybody, but the truth of the matter is that whether it's dentistry, podiatry, family medicine, or whatever it may be, when I study this whole realm of allowables or insurance reimbursements, it's surprising to me how non-committed the insurance industry is towards taking care of the doctors who carry a great amount of liability to treat patients. Right? You're writing off 30, 60, some of you are writing off 80%, depending on the procedure as an in-network provider. So I recognize the importance of adding things like material fees or upgrades or non-covered service fees in an effort for us to make up for the difference so that of the write-offs with insurance, so that we're not relinquishing our best lab partners or our quality manufacturers or using quality anything that comes at a premium. You know, it's just like when you want to go first class on an airliner, you got to pay for it, right? You have those options, which fortunately in dentistry and medicine, those similar types of options from sort of a legal perspective, a constitutional perspective, are even available for patients for the type of dentistry that you do. Now, real quick here, I want to just sort of go through a quick appreciation behind what people think of when they think of dental insurance. And we poll people constantly. We poll patients, and it's just funny to see the perception of why they love dentistry or why they think dentistry is beneficial. It's interesting that people sort of don't have the same objectives as you as it pertains to how they view insurance compared to how you view insurance. You know, insurance, here are some of the realities I feel are important for every dentist to know, is that only 6% of people with a PPO reach their annual maximum. 22% of people with insurance pay a deductible or get a restorative procedure done at least once a year. And then finally, these are nationwide statistics. Only 36 to 37% of adults that have a PPO plan are active. And then finally, there's this thing called loss ratios. Some of you may have been following the Massachusetts state legislation regarding loss ratios. Loss ratio is just a fancy term to indicate of the premium that a person would pay for dental insurance, how much of that actually goes towards benefits. And for a lot of insurance plans, it's less than 50% for a fully insured plan. I know that there's a difference with self-funded plans, but fully insured plans, it's 50, 60% or less, right? So half of what you spend on insurance doesn't even go towards benefits, right? What a terrible way to insure yourself, or what a terrible way to have insurance, right? So anyway, these are important to know because often one of the complaints that I hear when implementing a high-tech upgrade or a high-tech waiver in an effort to collect an upgrade fee from the patient is that a lot of times people say, well, that is a disservice to the patient when the patient has insurance. Well, number one, there are major limitations with insurance plans. They won't even cover upgrades. They don't cover material fees. No dental plan that I'm aware of. Oh, excuse me, there are some. Like here in Utah, Dental Select. They allow you to collect $50 for an upgrade, and that's it. Some insurance carriers, very few, would place a limit at $100. But when you really think about it, when you're doing beautiful anterior cases, where sometimes you would acquire a lab unit that's $300, $400, $500, $600, and being faced with a $700 total maximum that you can collect for that crown, it's hard to maintain profitability, right? So don't be worried about insurance. The fact of the matter is that insurance is very underutilized. So part of the high-tech upgrade fees is hopefully there to influence employers and insurance to add more of these things into their future plan designs, because that's exactly what we've seen with medicine in the past. So when it comes to dealing with insurance, I know it's not easy. Pain points today. I want to briefly really go through the HITECH Act, non-covered services. This is not a very lengthy topic, So put together your questions and I'd be happy to answer them. One thing that I'll throw out is that if this is new to you in terms of you charging a material fee, never call them a lab fee, mainly because almost every insurance contract prohibits charging lab fees or passing on lab fees to the patients, but they don't prohibit added value fees. Added value is the correct terminology on the actual phrase that's listed in the patient's contract with insurance, is that the patient is entitled to pay for added value components that their insurance does not cover. While this is a new concept, I guarantee you in 10 years, this is going to become the norm. Now, the HITECH Act, this was a law that was passed in 2009. You can Google HITECH Act of 2009, and what you'll find is it's several thousand pages of legal documents, but you can find a lot of articles, one of which that we've written, that sort of explain that the main component of the HITECH Act for this particular discussion is HITECH Act protects insurance waivers. And what that means is that if a patient signs an insurance waiver for an upgrade, and it's clearly explained to the patient that that upgrade is not covered, it's elective and they can choose to pay for it at their own expense, at that point, the HITECH law prohibits you as the doctor from disclosing that HITECH protected treatment with anybody, including insurance, the patient's spouse, children, any other family members, employers. So it's way above HIPAA in the sense that when you have an active patient, both you and the insurance carrier have HIPAA privileges over that patient, right? You can share data with each other between you and the insurance. HITECH prohibits that, meaning it is fully protected from insurance carriers or any other party for that matter. And that's where it becomes beautiful in the sense of an audit, is that under an audit, if a patient agreed to a HITECH waiver, that's the end of the transaction. An insurance carrier cannot bully you with an audit. So when you understand this, the problem that we're seeing in dentistry today, in fact, there's an active case going on. This is July 2024. There's an active case going on in California and the state of Washington. I can't go into the details of those. But when I looked at the preliminary data, when I looked at the history of how the upgrades or non-covered services were charged, there were no consent forms that the patient signed. And they used the code 2999 for the crown upgrades. And naturally, that's a code that arguably an insurance carrier it can say, well, we're entitled to see that because that's a CDT code. We're entitled to know, right? And so the cases that I'm following are cases where practices are not following the right steps. And the most important step is having a HITECH insurance waiver, which I'll cover some examples here on this webinar today. So that's the HITECH Act. Non-covered services, the majority of the states in the United States have passed the non-covered service law. Here's a current listing as of July 2024 of all the states that have a law that says, this is a synopsis. Every law is different, but most of them say something along these lines, that an insurance plan is prohibited from dictating the fees you get to charge a patient for a procedure that is never covered and has no benefits under that plan. There are exceptions to that rule in terms of frequency limitations and other plan design mechanisms, such as, if the annual maximum is met and it would have been covered, it's categorized as a covered service. But all the laws are consistent to where they say if it's never covered by the dental plan, and a good example are veneers with a lot of dental plans aren't even covered. If the veneers are priced out at $600, and your office fee is $1,200, the law says you can charge $1,200. Now, one part, and I'm going to mention this is actually very controversial, but I am proud to bring this up because we've vetted this out and we've been fighting insurance carriers on the definitions. A lot of insurance carriers will say, well, the state laws are exempt from the self-funded plans that are governed by federal ERISA laws, ERISA. And in the ERISA laws, they would send us copies of the clause within ERISA laws that say that self-funded plans or plans governed by ERISA are exempt from state law governance. When I contacted, I'm not going to mention the insurance company's name, but it's one of the larger ones out there, because they were forcing a doctor to refund the upgrade fees, or refund the difference of the non-covered service fees down to the in-network allowed amount in a state where there's a non-covered service law. So I was on the phone with this insurance company and I said, can I speak to your attorneys that write your guys' policies? I went straight for the jugular on this one and went straight to the attorneys. I don't want to talk to anybody else. I want to talk to the attorneys. I myself am not an attorney. I made it very clear. And then when I got on the phone with the attorney, I said, "Now I'm not an attorney, so I'm at a disadvantage when it comes to talking about the law. But let me ask you a question. Is there an option for a dentist to get a federal dental license?" And of course, the answer to that is no. So let me ask you another question. If a doctor's licensed under the state of California, state of Utah, wherever they may be, what set of laws govern that doctor's license? Well, state law does. Oh, okay. So state law does. So if a doctor practices, they are bound and protected by all state laws, correct? And they said, absolutely. That's the state is who licenses these doctors. Okay, end of discussion. These doctors are licensed in the state, and non-covered services are state law. So therefore, what you said is that these doctors have full protection under the privileges of their state law. And I used the technique against him and kind of led him along and fed him the answer that I was looking for, in a way where he kind of willingly gave up the answer that, yeah, you're right. State law governs these licenses. So anytime I have a dispute with doctors when I'm bringing up the state, assume not doctors, with insurance carriers when I'm bringing up non-covered services, keep that in mind, is that it's a state law and your license is governed by state law. So those, according to our attorneys, those are the two laws that would protect you. If you're in a state that doesn't have a state non-covered service law, the HITECH is sufficient enough to where when you waive treatment to insurance and the patient agrees to pay for it directly, that there is still protected in the HITECH Act in all 50 states. All right, so what are components? What are areas in which you can implement these upgrades, material fees, or non-covered services? Well, on the screen here, these are the most popular areas. There's a lot more. You can do this with veneers, night guards, dentures. Of course, implants are becoming very popular with the use of HITECH waivers these days. Are the cosmetics, that's a given. And the reason why you're able to do the cosmetics is because within the insurance contracts themselves to the patient or the employer, it clearly states that if a patient receives treatment that is above and beyond the scope of what insurance covers, including fees, the patients can elect to those procedures, those added value procedures, at their own expense. So that is baked into the insurance contracts between a patient and an insurance plan. My opinion on the coding of these material fees is, again, another controversial component, is I don't like using the 2999s for crown upgrades, mainly because, and I know that the CDT does stipulate that 2999 is designed for unspecifieds, but when you're CDT compliant on the upgrades, that there is a counter legal argument that would say, well, now you're obligated to submit that code to insurance, right? Because we all know the regulation is that you have to report everything that you do. But the reality is there's a lot of things that we create in-house codes for, and this is one of those categories, is you create an in-house code. Secondly, because there's not enough space on this particular slide, in the description, it's important to add the acronym HITECH. This is just my opinion. You put, like on the top one, you put Z1234, long-lasting material, zirconia, or durable material, whatever you want to call it. You don't want to put zirconia, or you don't want to duplicate the crown code definition in any way. Your description says HITECH dash long-lasting material, or durable material, or highly aesthetic material if it's an EMAX crown or anything in the realm of a cosmetic crown. So that's how I code it, is a non-conforming code, a code that I created, HITECH to start the definition, along with a description that explains the value. As far as pricing, for routine crowns, usually $100 to $300 nationwide is the upgrade, unless you're in a place like New York City, where I've seen those upgrade fees as high as $600 to $1,000. But if you're doing more extensive anterior cases, where the lab units are a lot more expensive, and there's truly a lot more master ceramic work that's being performed on that crown unit, you can pass on the entire material fee to the patient. And a lot of times those crowns would range from $300 to $600, like I mentioned at the beginning. You don't have to absorb those costs, because the crowns with cosmetics, the insurance company covers the functionality of the crown, whether it fits, whether it functions, to address the restoration needs of that crown in particular. But what they are not covering are the cosmetic components, the durable material components. You even have labs these days that'll put your favorite team's logo on that crown, or a diamond stud, or gold is a popular one, charging for the gold fees and all that. So for crowns, this is sort of how you do it. You have to have the right consent form, and here's an example of a consent form. You can just screenshot this, or I will, of course, share this with Arrowhead's team in the event where, well, if anybody asks them, we'll make sure that they have this on file here. But if anybody wants this from me directly, you can send me an email. I can send you a copy of this. So we use this very same format, even for gold crowns or anything else in the crown restoration area, because this is specifically written for crowns, right? On the implant side of things, I'm going to narrow this down to the highlighted area, but just this is a full implant informed consent. And I'm bringing this up simply because I got a lot of emails over the last couple of weeks from attendees asking me to address the implants that are on this webinar today. And this is the language that you want to use with implants. In fact, you could actually take this language and edit it to use it for veneers or any other, like dentures is a good example, dentures without implants, that is. So there's an insurance waiver and non-covered service disclaimer, which is the high-tech component. But the other part that I want to bring up, because I got an email from a surgeon that said, hey, I'm having trouble with, I'm using more expensive implant devices, but a lot of times the referring doctors are restoring the remaining components of that implant with different manufacturing parts, which voids out the warranty for the implant that I placed. And so coordinate with your surgeons or specialists whenever there's coordinated treatment, mainly because I actually interviewed several general dentists this week here in Utah where I live. And I asked them about this issue, and they said, yeah, well, if I could pass on the material costs and not have to eat it on my own, I'd be more than happy to follow the original parts components for the treatment if a specialist is using a specific lab manufacturer, right, or manufacturer for implants. So keep that in mind as it pertains to the type of clinical care that you want to do. Is that the idea is that you don't have to eat the cost of treatment. You can pass those on to the patient, just as that happens in the restaurant community, in the hotel. I'm not trying to commoditize dentistry, but when you look at it from, and forgive me, we all understand retail, right? But when you look at the retail market, whenever Nike wants to raise their prices, they do so, and we pay for that as the public, right? But in dentistry and in medicine, you're sort of bound with those insurance contracts where you're not able to raise fees for every single patient every single year because the insurance contracts have limitations against them, right? So I want to back up a bit and talk about implementation before we go into sort of the final steps of this presentation. I'm just going to scroll through some of these consent forms so you can take a look at them further. Now, what I recommend as far as implementation is, if you're a doctor on this webinar, as the leader and owner of the practice, everything starts with you. Meeting with your team members and perhaps showing them this recording is a good first step. You want to get your team members on board first. You want to vet out all the legal concerns that your your team members might have. And in my mind, one of the major concerns among the front office team members is that, well, I don't want to implement a financial policy that's only going to force patients to have to pay more out of pocket, right? Many of us put our feet in the shoes of the patient, right, to understand every single aspect of their life, not just their clinical. And that's just the beauty about healthcare professionals. But there is a big difference in the sense of like Delta or Blue Cross Blue Shield in a lot of states where they haven't raised your fees in 15 years. In fact, if you were in Washington, they lowered them in 2011, right? So we're faced with this whole realm of not getting reimbursements or increased reimbursements to cover, well, our studies indicate that the average inflation in dentistry since 2020 is 36%, 35 to 36%. Why? You add wage inflation, you add material cost increases, lab cost increases, rent increases, lease increases, interest rates, things of that nature. If you bought a practice when the interest rates started to rise. So there's naturally a significant increase in cost. And what we don't want as a practice, we don't want to have the increase in cost and the stagnant insurance reimbursements put our quality at danger. And what I tell team members when I was working in a DSO, as I said, you are the most important part of that quality, is that we need to make sure that there's a financial sustainability towards quality dentistry, and it starts with you as a team member, right? When you get the team members on board, I recommend starting small. Draft your consent forms. I start with crowns. If you're a general dentist, start with crowns. If you're a specialist, if you're an oral surgeon, periodontist, if you do implants, you could start that with implants immediately. It's a very similar implementation approach between implants and crowns. But start with crowns, develop your consent form, get everybody in your office to read it. I would even recommend having an attorney vet it just to make sure that you're not saying anything in that consent form that's going to be against state and federal law. When you implement it, start with a lower fee. A lot of practices, they practice this concept off of a fee of $49. This is just for regular routine crowns. If you're doing highly aesthetic cases, you could start this right away. The bigger cosmetic cases are easier to influence patients to move forward, because most patients that do move forward with anterior cases, they're ready to pay, right? And they end up paying a lot less than they expect when insurance limits their financial responsibility. So code it in your system, start small with a lower fee, implement it. The idea with this is that when you get your first patient to agree to this, well, when you have your discussion with your first patient, be very simple. Apply all the case presentation skills that you've learned. Be very simple and succinct, and quick technique in terms of the financial presentation. Normally, the doctors in the back would just briefly mention that, hey, I recommend a zirconia crown. It is a crown that is not fully covered by your insurance plan. There's an out-of-pocket component simply because of the cosmetic and durable nature of this particular crown unit. So it's far superior than that of what insurance covers. And so Susie up front is going to kind of walk you through those the financials for you, so you can start to prepare and something along those lines, something basic in the back. When that patient goes up front, when you present the treatment plan to the patient, most practices have a policy to collect the patient portion at that time. Is when you give the patient this particular consent form, of course, you're having them sign consent forms, but you're not drawing attention just to the material fee. In fact, you never want to itemize when you're sitting with a patient. You don't want to go and say the crown out of pocket is $300, the upgrade is $49 or $150, and the build-up out of pocket is, you don't want to do that. You give the patient, all that is listed there. You give the patient the global out of pocket, right? We circle, this is your responsibility today. And it's everything added up in terms of their out of pocket. Why I bring this up is because a lot of practices will point out individual fees for individual codes, which a lot of times would influence patients to say, well, can I just do without that upgrade, right? And you don't want that. Or can I just do without that buildup? In my mind, we want to address that by saying, well, each of these are most certainly required as part of, especially the buildups. Like we can't restore that crown without something to retain it. And then the upgrade fee, of course, is, patients really push back hard, and you're sort of at a point where it's like, well, we don't want to have an argument with this patient. We want to move forward with treatment. But what we'll do is we'll just waive the fee, right? Just a one-time waiving of the fee for this patient. And I ask the patient to keep that confidential. Some practices even say, well, your insurance covers a PFM, so let's just do a PFM on it. Many of us are not comfortable with that, right? We have a very strict standard of care that we want to follow, to where it does you much, much better long-term if you just waive the fee and ask the patient to keep it confidential. And I usually say, we don't really do the insurance-only covered dentistry, mainly because it's not the kind of dentistry that I believe in and that I'm comfortable doing. So what we're going to do this one time is we'll just waive that fee. You need a crown, but I don't want the financial component to be a barrier. So we're going to waive it one time for you. So this is on the house. Just keep that confidential, because at the end of the day, we just can't afford to do this for every patient, simply because higher quality care does come at a higher price point, So, but we're going to take care of you today. Something along those lines to keep the patients appeased. Now I'm going to open up the Q&A here in just a second, but what I want to briefly do is close just with an analogy as it pertains to this whole concept of 2 degrees, and then share my contact information. A lot of times when we look at 2 degrees, we tend to ignore the warning signs, right? We actually ignore something like stock investments or investments in general, right? In this day and age where interest rates are a lot higher, a 2% return is laughable, right? We just ignore it on the financial side of things. But when we start to increase the baseline number that we're measuring 2 degrees or 2% against, like at 1 mile, it's now 60 yards. At 1,300 miles, 2 degrees is more than a marathon. In 1979, Air New Zealand had this flight 901, and This was just a sightseeing tour. They would pack a bunch of people on a DC-10 jet airliner, fly down to Antarctica, round trip 6 hours. They went really low to look at the landscape, penguins, and just the landscape in general. But on this particular flight, by the time the aircraft reached 10,000 degrees, the story is told that it was actually air traffic control that gave the pilots their next set of coordinates that was 2 digits off of the original flight plan. For those of you that love aviation or are in it, you'll know that air traffic control, they're the police of the skies. You have to follow what they say. So the pilots dialed in the coordinates, 2 numbers off, didn't think much of it. Cloud line, by the time they were within 100 miles of Antarctica, was really thick. It was said that the cloud line at the time was closer to 7,500 feet, 8,000 feet. Mount Erebus is almost 13,000 feet in height. So by the time the pilots traveled 1,300 miles, within the flight plan, it indicated that they needed to descend from 30,000 feet down to 6,500 feet to get below the cloud line. But the pilots, because they're flying through the thick of clouds, they thought they were on the dotted line on that screen. Whereas in reality, they were on the solid line, and that 2-degree mistake put them directly in the path of that 13,000-foot mountain, Mount Erebus. And there was no warning because the cloud line was at 7,500 feet. They crashed right into the mountain. So this is a 2-degree error. This is very much applicable to this concept, is that you want to vet it out thoroughly. I highly recommend doing more research, getting opinions from healthcare attorneys that are familiar with this concept, having the right consent form, but vetting it out, asking all your questions before full implementation so that you're not one of the doctors that's facing a lawsuit against an insurance carrier, which is mostly because the HITECH process wasn't really followed. And that's why the insurance carriers have an opening to give you a hard time. This is all I ask, is that we just don't burn each other's practices down. I'm a big believer that dentists working together can make the industry so much better rather than fighting with each other. Questions? Okay, do you have any questions that have come up?
Yeah, the first question is where you go to find a lawyer that can appropriately advise you on this. Is it something you can go to just a general practice attorney, or do you need to find someone who has a specialty?
Yes, it's a good question. It's primarily a healthcare attorney that understands HITECH. Now, my advice with this is that a lot of times when you do come across attorneys that are not 100% familiar with HITECH, is when they read the HITECH Act, a lot of them give an opinion to say that for HITECH, you have to waive either the entire treatment plan or you can't waive any component of it, right? It's either all or nothing. And when I interview healthcare attorneys on this, they disagree with that opinion. And they say, well, that's actually not specified in the law itself. There's flexibility on this, right? But at the end of the day, a healthcare attorney, specifically one that understands HITECH, would be my best recommendation. We do have several that we've interviewed, and we're going to be posting that on our website, veritasdentalresources.com, within the next couple months. So if you need some recommendations there, just send me an email at that email on your screen.
Okay, the next question has to do with a dentist who says they tried to implement this, but when their team went to try and present this to patients, they felt like the patients were thinking they were trying to, sneak something under the radar or charge them for unnecessary things. Is there an approach that they can take that would better allow them to present this in a way that won't be perceived in that way?
Yes. So patients think that you're nickeling. Well, the team members feel like we're nickeling, diming the patients, right? Common concern. It all starts with your getting the buy-in from your team members, right? If they have concerns about this being a measure that they feel like is slightly unethical or entirely unethical, you will run into these concerns. And these concerns are fed to the patients by our own people. And so that's my experience, is that a lot of times when patients have those concerns is because they were fed them and by whoever was doing the presentation. So it's very important for the team members to be 100% on board, just like going out of network. If your team members are not on board, we have recorded phone calls where team members were intentionally sending patients to another practice, right? So with every concept, especially this one, get your team members on board, and if they understand it and they believe in it and they have quality care in mind, that you have options as a patient. We recommend this. This is the kind of quality dentistry that we do. When you lead with that argument, that's a quality care component, a lot of times what you'll find is that that's the culture of your practice that the patients believe in. If you're already doing that, which makes implementing a high-tech waiver and a recommendation to get something that's a little bit more of an investment, more the ability to persuade is a lot stronger if you're already running a practice that is quality care driven in nature and how you talk to your patients.
Okay. I have to make a comment before I ask you another question that came through.
Yeah.
Coaching your team is super important.
Yes.
They have to really believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really good way to allow the patient to make a decision on a service and a product that you provide for them. So one of the questions is this, and this is all about the coaching too. What if the patient signs the HITECH form, then a couple of weeks later, they change their mind and they call the office saying that they want the CDT code submitted to the insurance?
Mm-hmm.
What resources do they have in the practice, and how do you talk to the insurance about this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. This does happen every single day where the patient would change their mind. They want you to submit it to insurance to use their FSA or HSA plan, right? Because that's the only way that sometimes it has to show on the EOB. I make it very clear to patients that, for this particular component is actually not a recognized component on the part of insurance. And whenever we submit this to insurance, to be totally honest with you, they make a mistake and tell us that we can't even charge you for that procedure. Whereas, think about it. If you really wanted something and were willing to pay for it and somebody told you no, how would that make you feel? But it's different with insurance. And I'm honest with patients. This is the time when I'm really honest with them and say, it's different with insurance to where a lot of times we get abused. We get told that we can and cannot collect for certain things when we spend so much time and effort and years of continuing education to take good care of our patients. So on this component, there really is no option to submit that code, and it's our policy that we won't, right? And if the patient's belligerent, this is the one thing that I would recommend for patients that have a history of placing these types of requests. Is the cost to grief ratio worth it for you to retain a patient like this that's going to challenge you on every part, right? So for these patients, if they don't move forward with this high-tech component and they say, well, are there any other restoration options that don't include the upgrade? Perhaps I would say it might be a good idea to come up with one, or just waive the fee, right, for that particular patient. At the end of the day, what you don't want is to influence the patient to go to the insurance company. A lot of time when patients go to the insurance company is because there's distrust. There's distrust in what you've presented in terms of the financials to where they want to go and verify it. And if you don't have this explained properly to the patient from the get-go, you will have some patients take it to insurance, which you can still fight. Well, what I do when insurance carriers try to bully a practice on this is I usually start by saying, well, first of all, let me take your name and your employee ID number, mainly because what you're asking me to do is you're asking me to disclose treatment that was protected under the HITECH Act, which I don't have any legal privileges to do that. The patient can if they want to, and it sounds like they did. But if you're asking me to violate a law, then let me get your name, your full name, employee ID number, and I'll call the U.S. Department of Civil Affairs to ask if I'm permitted to break the law on your behalf. Before I'm done with that disclosure, they usually hang up on me, and that's how I usually handle those audits. So as it pertains to that, yeah, just make sure that patients understand it. If they want to back out of it before treatment, don't give in to say, yeah, we'll submit it to insurance. I would most likely just waive the fee and say, hey, we really care. If it's a really good patient, we really care about it. If they're a belligerent patient and they have a history of that, this is a perfect opportunity to consider dismissing them very gently. You have cause now, a really good cause, to dismiss them and have them go see somebody else. Very good. We have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, we have another question, and I'll read this directly. It says, how do I talk to a patient on an increase of a fee for EMAX that we do now with a D2740 code?
That's a good question. I probably need a little bit more information. So how do we address the increase in our crown fee, our EMAX crown fee? Did they mention insurance in there or not?
No, they didn't.
Okay, so just inflation, and it's an inflation discussion, right? So this comes up quite a bit where patients, especially your senior citizen patients, are complaining that you've raised your fees and they don't have insurance, right? They're paying out of pocket. If they have insurance, that's easy. It's like your insurance we negotiated a discount with your insurance. So you're getting a really big discount against your office fee. So that's how I address when insurance fees go up. People want to know, well, why do they go up? It's like, well, we all feel inflation every single year. Inflation is 2 to 3% naturally, usually under 1% most years. But we've been experiencing as dentistry over a 35% rate of inflation. And in order for us to do our job and take care of the public from an oral health perspective, those fees have to match the cost to deliver good quality care. So that's what you're seeing there in terms of a difference. You can even use that for your uninsured patients, the exact same argument that quality care requires an additional investment. And inflation is something that everybody's familiar with.
Yeah, I would like to make another comment about this, that it is very important to prepare your team for this kind of experiences they will have with patients. Comprehensive ideal treatment is not covered by insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have those conversations, especially, talking about money is vulgar in any situation.
Yep.
You have to really get to know the patient well and to actually recommend something like this. However, it's all about training the team.
Yes.
So I would encourage you to listen to this again with your team,
Mm-hmm.
doctors and team. Just listen to it and learn about this, because I think it's a good service that we provide not only the patient but also the practice.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. Are there any other final questions that you want me to address before we wrap up?
We have one final question, and that has to do with, are there any hard and fast rules that you can talk to your team about when dealing with these types of things so that you don't make any mistakes that could then open you up to problems with audits or, violation of this sort of HITECH Act?
Yes, excellent question. Yes, if you follow everything that was mentioned in here by first getting your team on board, training them, vetting out every single concern, that is a must, that you have to vet out all the concerns from your patient. I even recommend role playing. Just role playing for many sounds cheesy, but it actually works. In the sense of preparing you to say it live to a patient that you've never had that discussion with. You want to spend a couple of months, if not longer, practicing vetting out concerns as you go. But the most important thing to remember is that with almost every aspect of a dental practice is that your team members are going to make or break this particular concept, simply because they are the ones that have a lot of interaction, if not the most of the interaction with patients, right? Especially when it comes to talking about money, right? They have to have it nailed down. If they're 100% ready, you're going to have challenges along the way, but if they're 100% ready, give it a shot. Practice it, deal with the questions and the concerns as they come in. But if you follow everything listed in here in terms of having the right consent form, having the right amount of discussion with the patient to give them verbal informed consent, making it very clear that this is not sent to insurance, it is elective, and it's a non-covered service, right? You have to make that very clear. There has to be no question that the patient is getting a superior crown, and there's a little bit more of an investment outside of what their insurance covers. And it seems to me that is the number one reason why patients go to insurance, is because they weren't really certain that particular fee could be covered by insurance. If that's fully understood, what you find is that most practices don't really have a major issue in implementing this concept.
We want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Tuane for that excellent presentation. We hope you found the information helpful. Please remember to fill out the survey after the webinar ends. Your feedback is crucial for planning future webinars. Speaking of future webinars, we are excited to announce that our next webinar will be in August, and it's entitled Digital Workflows for the Modern Dental Practice. It will be presented by Dr. Sabah from the University of Texas. This will be a valuable discussion for implementing digital workflows within dental practices like yours, and how these new workflows can speed up your processes, improve your quality, and lower your overall costs. We are finalizing the date and time for this webinar, so be sure to like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram. We will post the registration links there as soon as they are available. Thank you again for your time and attention. We look forward to having you at the next Arrowhead webinar. Until next time.